Hello, everybody. It's Michael Pierce here. And state your name for the record, sir.
My name is Logan Reynolds. I'm a philosophy student here at OU with Michael.
We're in the graduate department, or philosophy graduate students here at the university, which I will awkwardly not say the name of because I'm paranoid about privacy, even though at this point it's probably like if it slips out, I don't really care. It's fine.
Yeah.
But we're colleagues here at the philosophy department. We've had a number of very interesting conversations. So I was like, well, let's go ahead and see if we can't catch one on camera. Kind of like trying to catch a deer on camera or something.
Lightning in a bottle.
That's right, yeah. So we'll see how awkward this is or not, but we're finally doing it.
It will be for the first 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
then it'll slip into like we're just talking.
Yeah,
Which will
yeah.
be where the magic happens.
That'll be when we forget the camera's there, so that's fine.
Yeah.
But it might take a minute. But and for my viewers, Logan is not as familiar with MBTI, so that's not going to be what the conversation is mostly about. But I'm at least of the opinion ENTP.
Yeah, near as I can tell.
Yeah.
It's been some years since I took the test, but that was what I got then. And I don't think much is. I mean, a lot's changed, but probably not that too much.
Yeah.
So
I'm of the opinion that it can change, but it's not an easy thing to change. It usually stays stable while manifestations change over time, but that's just my opinion. Get ready, though, in the comments, people will be putting their own analyses, which may very well wildly differ from each other. So that'll be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah.
But so feel free. But yeah, so, okay, I asked your name. How did you get interested in philosophy, Logan?
How long can this talk be? God, that joke was hackneyed, wasn't it? A lot of people have done that.
I don't know.
You know, that's not that long of a story. Basically, I got into philosophy because of Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
Probably Jordan kind of came on my radar. That'd have been probably late 2016, early 2017. And I don't even really remember how. He just did. At some point, I ran across him, and I'd seen a video or two, and I started watching the talks he did with Joe Rogan. And through all that, I wound up watching his series of lectures on the psychological significance of the biblical stories. Yeah. And of course, for any of y'all who have seen that, you know the kind of breadth of information that Jordan draws on. And I think the thing that struck me about Jordan was how critical a thinker he was, how deep, how detailed, how, if you watch that series, which I highly recommend, I'm sure a number of you have already seen it, maybe even seen it a few times through, but for those of you that haven't, I highly, highly recommend it. It's the psychological significance of the biblical stories. He goes through it in such a bit by bit detailed manner and really draws out the ideas and concepts that lay underneath of the words that he's analyzing. And that was sort of where I think my first brush with philosophy was this deep, critical, detailed, very associative, that was the word I was looking for the other day. This very associative thinking, drawing on all these different things and doing a deep dive on a text. And, he was sort of my first encounter with Nietzsche. He was my first, that's probably my first real encounter with Nietzsche. First real encounter with Dostoevsky, first encounter with people like Carl Jung, and
Freud?
No, yes, Freud, and the Russian fellow that he quotes so much, that he, the Gulag Archipelago.
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah,
Yep.
Solzhenitsyn.
Yep.
And neither, it wasn't so much them, but just him,
Yeah.
this incorporating all these different ideas and doing a really deep interpretation of a text. And that was sort of where I first got into this world. And then I watched a number of his lectures from his university lectures, from the Maps of Meaning and the Personality series where he was recording his university lectures.
I've watched those as well.
And that was my starting point, really thinking deeply about things and thinking about the world sort of the way he does. And that was how I wound up here.
Mm-hmm.
That was where I got started.
And which has been interesting in the department, because I believe I described you at one point as you were sort of trained in the tradition of Peterson, and I mean that quite seriously, that is not only a possibility, but it is an actuality in your case, because there is so much there. And I would say, and I've said this before, the psychological significance of the biblical stories, that is my favorite thing that he's done, and I would recommend that to anybody, because it had, whether I like it or not, and I do like it, but it had a profound influence on some of my thinking.
Yeah.
And so it's really that I think is one of the most important things he's done.
And I'll say to those of you who have seen it, and there's a good chance you're aware of this news already, but I was very happy when I heard about it, so I'll share it with those who haven't heard it yet. He announced, in sort of a side comment on one of his more recent interviews, that the Exodus series that he's doing with Daily Wire Plus will be put on YouTube. Don't quote me on this because it could be wrong, but I think it's this November.
Really?
But I know he said there is going to be, at some point in time, those videos are going to wind up on YouTube. So if you've been wanting to see the Exodus series and can't, whatever reason, those, I believe, will be up for free on YouTube later in the year. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Because I've seen bits and pieces of the talks that he's been doing with, I know there's a number of different figures. I know Dennis Prager's involved. I want to say Bishop Barron might be, but I can't be certain of that. I feel
like he is in a couple of them.
Yeah.
Probably, but.
And what I've seen has been really good.
Okay.
So
I haven't seen anything yet. I've been too busy with other stuff.
Yeah.
But, so there's a plug, Jordan. If you see this, contact us.
We're watching. If you remember that cowboy that you met in Akron, that was me.
There you go. Oh yeah, that's right. But anyway, and I don't necessarily want to talk too much on this, but it's interesting and important. What I was going to say before is it's been interesting that it's like I said, your training is very different from what is typical in most philosophy departments, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Well, I'll tell you, I don't want to. It sounded like you were going somewhere else. If you want to keep going.
Oh no, I think you're about to talk about what I was curious
so
about,
I think that's absolutely fair. So I've had kind of my educational background is very colored, but like not in a maybe that's the wrong word because it's not
I think I know what you
it's
mean.
not a checkered past sort of thing.
No.
It's I've been everywhere, man. You know, I was a music major for a while, and
still does music. I'm plugging in for his channel, unless you tell me not to. Then
No,
I'll cut this part out.
have at it, have at it. I was a music major for a while, and then I was a 7th through 12th grade social studies major for a while. Wound up a history major. So I finished my undergrad with a bachelor's degree, majoring in history, minoring in political science, and went back for a 5th year, got a minor in philosophy, because round about the time that I really got into Jordan, I discovered studying philosophy itself. That would have been like fall semester my senior year of undergrad. And so as a discipline, I discovered it pretty late and fell in love with it. Plumb fell in love with it. So I went back for a 5th year actually to complete a different minor, dropped that minor, continued on with the philosophy minor. and of course, I've talked with Michael about this. I've watched Jordan's content so many times that there is a way in which, as if by osmosis or something like that, I very much started thinking sort of in the way he thinks, not in a simplistic sort of copycat sort of way, but just I very much adopted it. It changed the way I think. And so, that was 2016, 2017. I get here in 2022. So you're looking at 5 or 6 years of being very much in that mindset. And couple that with a background in history, a background in the arts, and in general, and we can get into this, being a very open person from the Big Five personality standpoint. I think being 96th, 97th percentile in trade openness, interested in a lot of things, think very associatively. That sort of built this strange amalgam of thought processes and experiences and training, and that's what, I don't think it's at all unfair, and actually it's a compliment to say that I'm sort of trained in his tradition in some way, and to say that I have, I think, judging from my interactions with some of the other students here, a little different intellectual background than they do.
Different assumptions, different tendencies, different. It's difficult to pin down. It's difficult to pin down exactly what it is. But for a little bit, there was a period where they're like, "Oh, now we understand. You're a continental philosopher," but which isn't really quite true.
No, but if you're gonna, I think if you're gonna attempt to put me in a box, that's a reasonably fair one.
Yeah. But you've had positive interactions with what are considered very analytic philosophers that we studied during the time.
Absolutely.
Because so in some sense, it's better to say he's off the charts in openness and very familiar with Peterson's work and everybody associated that Peterson has brought up in that kind of milieu, as it were. But I'm very familiar with it too. In some sense, meeting you made me recognize how familiar I am with it, because I was like, oh yeah, I couldn't say precisely which lecture such and such an idea probably had its origination, but if I went through the lectures, I could probably figure out where it was. I don't know why that is. It's just very memorable for me. I listened to it a couple times through.
Well, you're the only man in the department that will giggle if I say the word lobster.
Yeah, exactly. And
not that I've made that reference.
No, you haven't.
There's been a number of times in class where I've made references, of one form or another. Some of them fairly subtle. Others not quite so much. And it's cool to watch you pick up on them, because I know every other person in the room is probably going, "What the hell is he talking about?"
It's a fascinating phenomenon. It's been very interesting for my position, sort of watching it, because as I've discussed with you, it's made me realize and kind of had to try to figure out how to overcome some of I'm very hypersensitive to potential for conflict, and being familiar with both Peterson and also familiar enough with, because as my sort of first exposure or studying of philosophy was Nietzsche and Wittgenstein, which are kind of like continental analytic, and those are the two guys I was first really studying. So I think through Wittgenstein, I kind of have some more familiarity with what the analytic tradition is about, and so and not just that, but also elements of the political tendencies and things that are also in the department. And so I'm seeing both sides, and constantly, it's like I'm watching a Tarantino film or something, and I'm just waiting for the tension to snap. It hasn't.
Well, it makes you a delightful mediator.
Well, that's good.
I think you're, for what knowledge and affinity I actually do have for the analytic tradition, you're much more versed in it than I am,
Hmm.
and understand it better. Having read Wittgenstein and spent so much more time in that realm.
Yeah, because I was a philosophy major in undergraduate.
Yeah,
and you didn't have that opportunity.
I very much come, I come to this very much from the, I don't know, the literary part of it. I don't know what you'd call it, but I think in words, and I don't know exactly how much that comes into play, except to say I come to it, from Jordan, from these sort of authors these thinkers who are not necessarily thinking in systems, but they're thinking in ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I'm sure I'm butchering that a little bit, but I still very much came to it from, what would you call it? Almost like applied philosophy.
Yeah.
In some sense,
It's very concerned with trying to solve certain almost spiritual problems in some sense. And it's very the problems that not just Peterson, but a number of the people who he's referenced and other people associated in there, Nietzsche certainly, they're very interested in. Spiritual is really the best word for it, that kind of sort of taken in a loose sense, but but also this deep infusion of pragmatism in the American philosophy sense of, like, William James, which I think Peterson's mentioned before, the notion of truth is what works.
Yeah.
That's pragmatism. So in some sense that's another sort of tradition that's melded in there.
Yeah.
And whereas the analytic tradition is very, very technical and very it came from, it's the analytic tradition to which we owe a lot of logic, actually, a lot of the propositional logic, and as a result of that, they're very interested in trying to solve problems by playing with words and definitions and systems and meanings and things. And I have some of my own feelings about the problems and failings in the tradition, but I didn't feel it's necessary to get into that in the moment, but because I need to formulate my thoughts some more.
Yeah.
I just thought it was an interesting aspect. But the other thing was two ideas. One of them is one of the ideas you've been playing a lot with is trying, the way I understand it, is trying to bridge the is-ought gap. And this also actually is one of the things that I think has maybe caused confusion in the department, because you are trying to bridge that gap. And I think for a lot of analytic philosophers, they just assume we're not going to bridge it, certainly not with reference to anything other than playing with the language itself and trying to figure out, there must be some confusion here in how the words fit together. Whereas you're coming in from sort of the Petersonian tradition and saying, maybe I can bridge this by reference to, not purely by reference to evolution, but at this point I will let you take over and correct me on anything.
I think bridging, part of it's bridging the is-ought gap. I think for me,
that's how I think of it, but I feel like you have sort of different goals, maybe.
One of the ways I've characterized it is maybe bridging the gap between religion and science.
Yeah.
Sort of a Piaget's project in some sense. And I didn't initially think of it that way. It was just something that occurred to me, like this thought that I've been playing with. But the more I think about it, that's sort of the characterization for it. And I think, God, there's a lot here. So I'll start what's a good place to start? So we talk about, this came about as I think largely as a discussion in our metaethics course.
Yeah.
Where we're talking about the nature of the good.
Right.
And if it's
Right.
real. And this is a great place to start now that I think about it. My sense of good is, when you think about lower levels of what we call good, you know, what do we mean when we say that food is good, a particular dish is good? Well, there's a couple different ways, because we have different terminologies. We can say that, well, let's talk about flavor for a minute. This cake tastes very good, or this pasta tastes very good, or this steak tastes very good. And what we mean is it's, my interpretation is it's successfully fulfilling some desired function from the object. Now, we can shift that, right? We talk about food that's good for you, and we talk about things that are nutritious. And what that does is it actually shifts, or it changes lenses. It changes goals. Because the goal of good tasting food is to be pleasurable to the palate. It's supposed to present some series of flavors that are pleasing to you. It's a pleasure thing. The goal of food that is good for you is to provide nutrition to the body. And you get some crossover, and actually perhaps some of the most, it's interesting to me that one of the holy grails of food in some sense is it's not just good, but it's good for you.
Right.
That's where you get this interesting, and for me, what that signifies is an object which can fulfill multiple goals.
Right.
And that's sort of a higher order good. It's not just good tasting. It's not just good for you, for some people, Brussels sprouts, yeah, they're good for me, but they don't taste particularly good, which is not the case for me. I love a good Brussels sprout, especially if it's wrapped in a little bacon, but that's neither here nor there. So you have some foods that manage to accomplish both, and we actually, if you're concerned about such things, we treat that as a substantial achievement to have found something that is both delicious and nutritious, so to speak. And so I think about that. It's like, well, what is that? And so I think the food that tastes good performs the action of being flavorful well. And the food that is good for you performs the action or performs the function of providing nutrition well. Good cars get you from A to B well. And there's a spectrum on that, right? It maybe it's reliable, but it's not particularly fast. Maybe it's fast, but it's not particularly reliable. And you get things higher in, you get things that, what will people say about a vehicle? Well, there's a way in which there's some element of the process of transportation that the car performs well.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to sit, we got chairs scattered throughout the room here. If I were to go sit in one of these chairs and I fell through it, that would be a bad chair. That would be a broken chair. It no longer performs its function well.
It might be good for something else, but not as a chair.
It might be good for something else, but it is not good as a chair. And
you're very Aristotelian in this sense.
Yeah.
So you have an affinity for that.
Yeah, I think one of Jordan's ideas that really struck me is, a thing is not what we call it; it is what it does.
Ah, yes.
And an interesting thing that I found for that was, I return repeatedly to, and I'm sure this is probably a paraphrase, but the Shakespearean line that "a rose by any other name would yet smell as sweet."
Yep.
It's like it is not being called a rose that makes something a rose. It is being rose-like.
Mm-hmm.
It is being arranged in a certain way and behaving, acting, doing that which only that thing does. Mm-hmm. That makes a thing that thing. It is the word rose is just a label. And I think about this with languages. If I say hello, hola, guten Tag, ni hao, either one of those, they all mean the same thing fundamentally, functionally. As a functional piece of language, they are what we would say in English a greeting. They are a vocalization that leaves my mouth when I wish to acknowledge the presence of another human being.
Mm-hmm.
It's a greeting. And they all function that way. Now, the different languages have created different vocalizations to signal that function, but the function yet remains the same.
Right.
And that's why we can even learn other languages. You know, I took 4 years of Spanish in high school, and that's why I can say hola, you know, and use it, because there are these functions in language across languages. And that's what makes learning other languages possible. And so to return back to, I'm sorry, we've gone a bit far afield, to return back to
the good.
To the good. So extracting out what we mean when we say good means when we label it, you know, in lower order usage of the word, we say it performs a function well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what does that mean for the good? Good as such. And the thing that I've come to think, one of the things that I've thought about with that is, whatever the highest order of good is, well, I have to explain how I get to this point. So from that, I derived the idea that I think the word good is inherently value laden, meaning you can't label something good or bad without some scale,
right?
Some way in which to measure it.
A dimension has to be presupposed.
Yeah, a value, a desire in some real sense. And it's interesting because someone might take that and run with it and say, then that means that good is subjective. And there is a way in which it is, in that it needs a value, it needs a scale for it to mean anything. Because in some sense, you know, a thing just by, if we imagine absent humans for a moment, just say we're gone, what is there to say that anything does anything well or poorly? Because there isn't a desired outcome. It just is.
Right.
It just is. It loses the valuation of it. And so there's a way in which it's subjective. It requires a evaluation, a desire. It requires something that you want for a thing to perform in order to place a good or bad distinction on it. But this is where this starts to grow a little bit. I perhaps need to slow down because I'm losing myself just a little bit here. If it's value-based, if good and bad are value-based, then what does that mean for the good? Well, it means that there is, I think, some utmost desired outcome that facilitates, or that good actions are aimed at. Mm-hmm. And I got to thinking about those. And so we think about, let's take this to higher order. What do we consider good and bad actions? Okay, well, good. Well, let's look at bad first. What do the worst actions that we can think of have in common? And can we perhaps see some theoretical scale within the scale of badness, within the spectrum of badness, that might suggest some underlying value?
We're usually putting murder as pretty darn low.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Mm-hmm. That's really out there. And we would say something like shoplifting.
Right.
it's illegal. And in general, we'll just say, we're not talking about, Jean Valjean here. We're talking about just stealing something because you can.
Yeah.
That's bad, but it's not murder bad.
Right.
The first time you do it, it's a slap on the wrist, a little bit of a fine, at least around here. And, you're not going to prison for that right out of the gate. You whack somebody, that's bad. You sexually assault somebody, that's bad. You assault somebody, that's bad. And you can see I'm beginning to kind of walk back the scale here. Well, the scale that sort of appeared to me is, and this ties in with the biological element of this, so this attempt to unify morals and science, or religion and biology. Mm-hmm. Because I think, and this is a bit much to go into, but I agree with Jordan's statement that Western culture, broadly speaking, has a Judeo-Christian underpinning, but we don't need to go there at the moment. Just to finish out this idea, the spectrum of bad appears to be reflective of the impact reflective of the negative impact the action has on the life of another. Mm-hmm. Now that's just within what we would call the standard legal scale, and it's very unfortunate that I can make this reference, but a couple of days ago, this shooting in Nashville, the school shooting, and school shootings, period, they seem to transcend simple murder in some way, because, and not to say any murder is simple, I just mean simple in a sort of technical sense.
One person.
One person.
A school shooting, you're not only taking out multiple people, you're taking out children.
And Jordan's talked about this some. Often the shooter themselves perishes.
Right. I think that almost always is the case, isn't it?
And we can tie this into his interpretation of that here in a moment. What I came to realize is it's a reflection of the negative impact on the lives of others. But then I realized that's not quite it either. I think that what we consider immoral, deeply immoral, is a reflection of the extent of the negative impact on life itself of a particular action. And you can see that in if I purposely set a massive forest fire, or if I'm a poacher, killing, and I'm not, poaching's a complicated subject, because some of the folks in African countries who are doing that are in a position where, you can tell them that they shouldn't do it, but there's a degree to which you understand how they get there. Mm-hmm. But we don't need so much as to say animal cruelty. We consider that deeply immoral.
Yeah.
Even though it's not an affront on humans, there's a way in which it's cruel and destructive. Well, what is cruel and destructive? It's an affront to what I call life with a capital L. Life as such, the totality of whatever it is that lives. And so to bring the biology into it for a moment, I thought about why that might be the case. Why might that be the case?
And if I may, quickly, it's important because it's not a simple or complex hedonism per se, which is to say it's not just about pleasure-pain.
No.
Because pain
can be useful.
Can be useful for the propagation of life.
Yeah, that's why we value working out.
Right.
Exercising, doing difficult things. Right. You can experience pain in a way that is fruitful.
Yes.
And with the exception of the degree to which you're predisposed to enjoy or not enjoy that, with that slight exception, as a whole we value that.
Right.
As a whole we value people who undertake the sacrifices necessary to wind up with better things in the end. So it's not pain itself that we're avoiding. It's something like pain without purpose.
Yeah.
cruelty, which seems to be pain inflicted for its own sake.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's a great distinction. So at the biological end of this, I think that reality has a structure. That at any given moment there is, in fact, a way in which things are. And it's not flexible. Well, I wouldn't say not flexible. It's flexible over time. And it can be negotiated with, as Jordan would say. But there, at any given moment, and I think evolution makes this clear, at any given moment, there must be a certain amount of mapping of an organism's behavior onto their environment for them to survive. And I think the fact that if they don't map that they don't survive is evidence of a sort of logic in the universe, a logos, a explorable, somewhat set reality.
Mm-hmm.
If that there are rules,
puts conditions on life.
Yeah. Well, and conditions on everything.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the law,
law of gravity,
physics, chemistry. I think one of the remarkable things that science has shown us is that there is a way in which the world is, and
right.
It's somewhat predictable. And it's the fact
in some sense, those two statements are kind of, you could almost argue, are the same thing.
Yeah. Well, if it weren't predictable, I've made this case. We're talking about causation in our metaphysics course.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've come to realize is causation, in some sense, the fact that causation exists must be the case, because if things were not reliably causally linked, that to me the only way I can think of for that to be the case would be for there to be no underlying order in the universe. Mm-hmm. And clearly there is some semblance of one. Mm-hmm. So it's a reductio exercise. And so all of that to say,
if there weren't an order, I might turn into an elephant right now.
Right. There is no.
It would just be completely unintelligible.
Yes. Intelligibility is a great word for it, and right. So,
and not in an edgy sense of the world is not intelligible. There's no meaning, and I'm going to go read Nietzsche and smoke. And sorry, that's a weird thing to say. No. But in like the sense of no, it's not like edgy unintelligibility. It's actual unintelligibility.
Yes.
There wouldn't be anything. So sorry.
Yes. No. That's great. And so working with that there is a set of rules. Okay. Well, what are some of the? I'm an extractionary or distilling kind of thinker. Mm-hmm. I like to look at broad occurrences of things and then pull out whatever I think is the central, or use those to build a case for something that's going on, which is present in all of that. And so I look at things like, what are some of the rules for life? Like the core things that you might, for whatever reason, if you don't eat, you die. If you don't drink, you die. If you don't reproduce, that won't, not reproducing won't kill you, but it will end your line. Right. And if the entirety of a population did that, then that population would cease. The bottom line is that there are things one must do to stay alive. And this applies for every single biological organism on the planet, mm-hmm. right down to the single cells. There is something that has to take place for that life to continue. And so I thought about that, and I'm fascinated by Jordan's idea that action demonstrates value better than words do. And so I thought, in some sense, what must be the case for at least the continuation of a large-scale biological system? Well, the continuance of a large-scale biological system seems to me to be dependent on the existence of beings of one form or another capable and willing of undertaking the actions necessary to continue life. Mm-hmm.
I was only smiling because it's just very characteristic of you, the way that you lay it out very precisely.
Yeah.
Very this continuation of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I wasn't laughing at you.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm enjoying. I've finally managed to start behaving as though the camera isn't there, which has loosened me up a little bit.
There you go.
Allowed me to just do what I do.
Yeah.
And so,
but in any case,
if you imagine for a moment that, well, let's say that the rule is such that if you don't drink water, you will die, and for some unimaginable reason, a switch was flipped, and every living, creature that needs that rule decides to disobey it, then life discontinues. Right. So you can see the requirement of the behavior. But then it's not just the single behavior, it's the set of all behaviors. Mm-hmm. It became somewhat apparent to me that something like an ability and willingness to undertake the actions necessary for the continuance of life is a prerequisite for the continuation of all life with a capital L, on a massive scale. Right now, and so when I think that's the core evolutionary trait. That is the thing which begets all adaptive behavior. If you as a scientist, you would characterize as something like the apparent ability and willingness, whatever will an animal may manifest, to do the things necessary to survive.
Right.
A will to survive.
Sure.
And to put that into human terms, if we take the idea seriously that what you do symbolizes what you value, what you will sacrifice for symbolizes what you value. It's not even the sacrifice at this moment, it's what you do, what you're willing to exert energy for, which I guess in a sense actually is a sacrifice. What you're willing to expend calories for mm-hmm. is a direct reflection of the importance of something to you. Mm-hmm. In my way of thinking, the ability and will to do the things necessary to continue an organism's life is functionally the same as the valuation of life.
Right.
And so, from a biological standpoint, I think potentially the central core idea of all evolution is something that could be characterized as the value of life. And I don't know how it could be any other way. Mm-hmm. Because I could at least say, if you don't value life, and you take that seriously, you do not value living, which in this definition means you will not expend calories and time to do the things necessary to continue to survive, then you will not survive. Mm-hmm. And if you deployed that on a life-wide scale, then the whole enterprise falls apart.
Right.
I don't know how it could be any other way in some sense. And so, in some sense, biologically, the most important evolutionary trait is behaving as though life were important.
Right. And I just had this thought while you were talking. It ties in with the note that you'd made actually I think it was just yesterday, where you mentioned evolution is usually treated as complete random chance, which the mutation element obviously is.
Yeah.
And that's sort of but it's, in some sense, the prevailing view, though I think it is starting to have a lot of cracks in it, is that there is no concept of will in evolution. There certainly is no concept of a goal. And in some sense, there is no true distinction between the inorganic and the organic in evolution. It's just it's supposed to just be the happenstance of or the confluence of the molecules together into a replicator RNA, and then it snowballs coincidentally into, and I have a lot of problems with that view, and that's what came to mind when you were talking about this. Once you input the notion of will, that these creatures want something, and that's not just a new term for the molecules moving around in a particular way, but there's something extra going on. I don't know what it is, but there's something else involved there that guides them, because otherwise it just becomes, to me, it becomes preposterous, because if you have the notion of will and the notion of valuing life, as you say, or some kind of goal, it makes it so everything will begin to organize itself towards that goal. And if you don't have that, then you're relying on, in my mind, just probability and coincidence that it will just happen to fall that way. I'm speaking off the cuff, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
And to head off a potential criticism of some of the things you just said, I'll make clear, I'm not attempting to make any bold claims as to what the intellectual conceptual processes of these life forms is. I don't mean
You're not talking about that.
I don't mean will in any sense as we would say conscious will in human beings. It's more like, here's the thing, even if you call them instincts, subconscious or unconscious drives, the reality is, while those drives are not articulated, they are programs that are, and I don't mean programs in a mechanistic sense, but they are instincts present in these animals to an extent sufficient to guide their behavior. They act as if continuing to live is important.
And that developed from the simple fact that if they didn't value living, then they're no longer with us. So, you know.
Well, that leads into another thought I've had, is like, so here we are, why do we value living? Well, there is a way in which, if you think about this system seriously, why do we, at this instantiation, value living? Well, at a certain level, it is possible we'll have to move rooms. Not sure yet.
If the background changes, that's why.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
If we take my idea seriously for a moment, and the guiding principle of life through the evolutionary process is the valuation of continuing to live, and it manifests in the ability and willingness to do the things necessary to survive, then you run that system for 3.5 billion years. And it seems to me to be a natural conclusion that the vast majority, if we are descended from beings who did that, who are descended from beings who did that, who are descended from beings who did that, and on back the evolutionary scale, if the vast majority of the creatures allowed to reproduce within this system manifest that ideal, then it makes sense that the majority of the offspring, after the system has been allowed to run for any extended period of time, that the majority of the present generation would on some level hold that ideal. Seems to be a natural consequence of the process.
Right.
You're sort of born with that instinct. I don't think anyone's born hating life and not willing to do the things that would keep life going. Interestingly, it seems to be mostly conscious beings that ever develop that behavioral tendency, which is something else to maybe talk about. So just to tie things together real quick, going back to my statement that I think, roughly speaking, behaving as though one values life is the central cog in the evolutionary wheel, in the wheel of whatever the mechanism is that allows life to exist at all. To tie that back into the previous discussion of what we call immoral The most heinous acts we can imagine are those which are the greatest affront to life.
Right.
And the least awful that we can imagine, though perhaps still illegal, are those which present negligible, real threats to life. See, it's to another's life when we talk about things like murder. But when we talk about mass murder, well, that seems to up the scale some. And when we talk about things like animal cruelty, that shifts the scale some. We can find something immoral that does not kill a human being, but inflicts cruelty on a living being. And so that's where I think religion and biology come together, or where morality and science come together, where the ought and the is maybe come together, although I'm not certain.
That was something I introduced.
Yeah,
but,
this divide that we're talking about, this science and religion, this concern with what to do versus the concern with what is. I think there's a joining point, and the connection between morality and biology is, I think, for whatever reason, the central cog in the wheel of biological life is the willingness to act as though one values life. And for whatever reason, the most immoral things that we can come up with, the most immoral things that we can come up with present the greatest damage to life as such. And the whole scale is based on damage to life as such, whether it's through a particular individual or a group, or, we think about things like the Holocaust. 6 million human beings dead for horrible, horrible reasons and through horrible, horrible mechanisms. And that's why that thing's so awful, because it went so far down the scale of affront to life as such. And so that's where human morality and biological reality meet, is both systems, I think, place life with a capital L, life as such, at the pinnacle of their value structures, conscious or otherwise.
Well said.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
It only took me an hour.
No. Well, a little less than an hour. That's great. And I think for sort of the final thing of the final stretch here, that I was curious about is thoughts on nihilism. Because you touched on the notion of, it seems, it's an interesting thing that conscious beings seem to be capable in a way that less conscious or non-conscious, however you want to divide it, they don't seem capable of nihilism and the conscious devaluation of life as such, which you do find kind of, I think you could argue you find a growing sense of that to a certain extent, not in the active sense that you get with, say, a school shooter, but in a more passive sense of what would you say? Feeling that the pains of life make it so that life itself is not worth it. You brought up a very interesting example, where it's like if there were a special light switch, and if you flip the switch off, then just all life on Earth just dies, is gone. Yeah. And if you put someone in front of the switch, would they do it? Yeah. And I don't know if you want to elaborate some more on
that was a thought experiment I ran, because I thought, okay, I have this hypothesis that life is the highest value, and I mean life, period. Okay? Obviously a very difficult thing to test. I've sort of extracted it out of what I think are good real-world examples. I think I have seen the pattern and managed to pull it out of its instantiation. But how in the world would you test it? And I don't know that you could ever test it on a scale enough to make this conclusive, although I think it's right. But let's say I sat someone down, and we'll say for the moment that I am asking an individual if they value life above all else.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, if you push this button, every single living thing on the planet will be dead. Is there anything for which you would push this button?
Right.
And my contention is, and I've asked a few people this question, the answer is always no. There is nothing for which they would push that button, which, going back to my theory, and it's not my theory, my interpretation of Jordan's theory, that what you will, I think valuation is a function of one's willingness to sacrifice one thing for another. You know, is your health or your pleasure in your palate more important to you? And maybe you can find a balancing act. That's not what I'm saying. But what you see when you find individuals who, maybe I'll put a different example out there. What's more important, alcohol or your relationships with your family, or your physical health? And what we find in addictions, what we call addictions, are horrendous misvaluations of any single instance of something. And I think, we can't go down this rabbit hole. We'll save that for another conversation. But I think all bad behaviors are essentially what the Bible would call false idol worship. It is the selection of an inappropriate part of reality as the most important part.
Right.
And it's a destruction of the appropriate value hierarchy that would otherwise let the system work.
Right.
And you would see that in an addiction, like, well, what lets the system work? Basically, the valuation of life, period. Now, it's not that articulated for humans, but I think that's what's going on. Well, if you place the desire for alcohol or the desire for a particular drug in an inappropriate standing to that value, then necessarily you will start to sacrifice the things which depend on the life valuation for the fulfillment of the addiction.
Right.
So, all of that to say, I believe that basically what you will give up for what is a demonstration of your value hierarchy. Okay. So, the ultimate question then is, if everything I've laid out is even partly correct, if we're playing with this, and I sit someone down and I ask them, is there anything at all for which you would push a button that would kill all life on Earth? And the answer has been no. Now, it's a thought experiment. It's obviously very different from actually making such things come to pass. I'm open to those objections, but it's interesting to me that at least when you ask the question, the answer is no. And then I thought about it some more, and I thought, well, that's just turning the lights off. If you had anybody who had reservations about whether they would or would not do that, you could ask them, okay, you push this button and every single thing on Earth dies an agonizing, multi-hour, painful, awful death.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, again, I think everybody that you would pose that question to, I think, would say no. And I need to ask more people, but my suspicion is, well, why not? Well, part of it is they've got at least one human being that they wouldn't want to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, that's just a level of pain, and it's not just the instantaneous lights out, it's the pain and suffering and awfulness of it.
Right.
And so at least a painful death is a no-go. I think death period is a no-go, but I played with it some more. If it is just an instantaneous lights out, just gone, everything. It's so interesting. I snap.
You always snap. It's like
Thanos.
I was about to say.
Yeah.
I was about to say Thanos snap. It's like an archetype or something.
I think I discovered I don't know if there are any individuals that would do it, but the fullest instantiation of a particular train of thought might have one thing. I think nihilism,
right,
taken seriously to its fullest darkest extent, the genuine belief that life is nothing but suffering would have an answer and would have something for which it would push the button. Again, I don't know if any individual nihilist would do this.
Right. But the spirit of nihilism,
the spirit
if you will,
of
zeitgeist,
the spirit of the idea
yeah,
would say it would push that button for the cessation of suffering.
right.
Or potentially,
Yeah.
this is just thinking. So that's sort of the experiment that I've run a couple of times, to at least in articulated knowledge. Again, I'm open to that criticism. At least in articulated thought and belief, it seems to me that it's an interesting little demonstration, I think, of the probability, and the reason I should say, the reason I say everything on earth is I very much consider this life itself. Right. It's not all people, because I think you would get, it'd be interesting to see if you did it as all people, if there would be ideologies that would do that.
Right.
Because of the belief, that humanity is some sort of parasite on the planet.
Right.
But I'm saying all life, period. Wipe the slate clean. There is not a living thing left on the planet.
Make the earth the moon.
Yeah, and it's sort of it's a modus, what would it be? It'd be a modus tollens, right? Something like that.
Oh, yeah, I remember you formulating it that way.
If we take the premise that sacrifice is a reflection of valuation,
mm-hmm.
then we could pose it as a logical proof. You could say, and this is probably oversimplified, but maybe not. If we take that seriously, and that's what we're working with, then we could say, if life itself is not the most important thing for an individual, then there will be something for which an individual would sacrifice life itself, like all life.
Right.
And if we were to arrive at the premise that there is no thing for which an individual would sacrifice all life itself,
right,
then the individual values life, period, above all else.
Right.
At least conceptually, theoretically.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got some good material here.
God, I hope so.
Yeah, and we've got to head off to logic in a little bit.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah,
because,
we will. This is good.
That cracked open some things that I want to explore further. So
perfect.
We'll have to do that again.
Logan, it was a pleasure having you on.
Good as always, Michael.
That's, as always, be sure to check out Logan's channel, which I'll link to below. Hear him singing, and I think that's mostly what you do.
Yeah, and I've got. I was a saxophone player for a long time, so I've got a video of me playing the saxophone solo from Urgent by Foreigner, and I've got a jazz band video on there, but that's been years ago now. Everything I've done, I've got a couple of firearms videos that have done well, but everything I've done for the past several months now has been music related. I play guitar and I sing country music in a variety of styles, I would say, but mostly older school kind of stuff, everything from old cowboy music. I got hooked on Coulter Wall, so I do a lot of Coulter Wall, but I do George Strait, Johnny Cash. I've got one of my originals on there. I do a lot of different stuff, and I've got a few videos up. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, check it out. If you like it, like and subscribe. That'd be awesome. It's growing slowly, so I'm trying to get that up off the ground as well. So
there you go. All right. Well, thanks for being here, Logan.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Absolutely.
We'll do it again. And
I'll see you all in the next video.